People rarely fall in love all at once. What happens first is something quieter. A glance that lingers a little too long. A conversation that feels strangely effortless. A single moment that your mind keeps replaying long after it's over. And before you realize it, you're no longer getting to know a person. You're building a version of them that exists almost entirely inside your own mind. That is where love can begin. But it's also where illusion begins. Falling in love too fast isn't necessarily a sign that your feelings are fake. Sometimes it's a sign that your emotional needs found a place to land before your judgment had time to catch up. For many people, especially those who spent years questioning where they belonged or whether they would ever be fully accepted, connection can feel less like a slow discovery and more like a sudden relief. Not because the other person is perfect, because hope arrived before certainty did. And hope is powerful, especially after loneliness. Loneliness changes the way the brain interprets attention. A single thoughtful message can feel like profound understanding. One night of deep conversation can feel like emotional safety. A few moments of genuine acceptance can seem like proof that you've finally found someone who sees you. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes it isn't. The difficult part is that emotions move much faster than evidence. Your heart isn't trying to deceive you. It's trying to protect you from returning to isolation. That changes how every interaction feels. A delayed reply becomes anxiety. An unexpected compliment becomes a promise. A shared interest becomes compatibility. Small moments begin carrying enormous emotional weight. Not because they're objectively significant, because they symbolize something you've been searching for. Belonging. We often imagine falling in love as discovering another person. But many times, we're discovering a future we've secretly wanted for years. A future where we don't have to explain ourselves, where affection feels easy, where our identity isn't questioned, where being chosen feels ordinary instead of extraordinary. Those dreams are deeply human. The challenge begins when those dreams become attached to someone you've barely had time to know. Your imagination starts filling in the missing pieces. Silence becomes mystery instead of uncertainty. Kindness becomes permanence instead of possibility. Chemistry becomes compatibility. The mind dislikes incomplete stories, so it finishes them, quietly, without asking permission. Psychologists sometimes describe this through ideas like projection and idealization. We naturally fill gaps in our understanding using our own hopes, expectations, and experiences. The less information we have, the easier it becomes to imagine exactly what we want to see. Ironically, certainty often feels strongest when we know the least. That's why early attraction can feel intoxicating. There are still no disappointments, no unresolved conflicts, no ordinary routines, only possibility. Possibility is emotionally addictive because it hasn't yet encountered reality. And reality is always more complicated than imagination. Social media amplifies this effect. We don't simply meet people anymore. We encounter carefully selected moments. A photo, caption, playlist, a few messages that seem deeply personal. Our brains naturally weave those fragments into a complete emotional picture. But fragments aren't the whole person. Neither are first impressions or perfect conversations. Digital intimacy can create emotional acceleration. You learn someone's favorite songs before you've seen how they handle disappointment. You know their aesthetic before you know their values. You know how they present themselves before you know how they repair conflict. Those are very different things. Real intimacy isn't measured by how quickly conversations become vulnerable. It's measured by how consistently two people remain honest after novelty fades. Novelty is exciting. Consistency is revealing. There is another layer that's often overlooked. Sometimes falling in love too fast has less to do with romance than recognition. You meet someone who reflects a version of yourself you've been longing to become. Someone who seems comfortable expressing qualities you've hidden. Someone who lives openly in ways you once believed were impossible. That recognition can feel magnetic. Not because you've found your missing half. Because you've caught a glimpse of your own unfinished story. Admiration can quietly transform into attachment. And attachment can be mistaken for certainty. The emotions are real. The conclusions may arrive too early. This is especially important when relationships become places where identity feels safer than the outside world. Shared experiences can create immediate understanding. There can be relief in not having to explain parts of yourself that others have misunderstood. That sense of relief deserves respect. But relief isn't the same as compatibility. Being understood in one area doesn't automatically mean two people share the same goals, communication style, or emotional readiness. Those discoveries take time. Time isn't the enemy of love. It's one of its greatest tests, because time slowly removes projection. It replaces assumptions with patterns. It shows whether apologies become change, whether affection survives ordinary days, whether curiosity remains after excitement fades. Infatuation asks, "How do they make me feel?" Love eventually asks, "Who are we becoming together?" Those are different questions. One is driven by emotion. The other requires observation. Sometimes people fear slowing down because they're afraid the feeling will disappear. But genuine connection rarely depends on urgency. If affection only survives at full speed, it may have been fueled more by uncertainty than stability. Real closeness often grows in quieter moments. The conversations that aren't dramatic. The days that aren't unforgettable. The disagreements handled with respect instead of fear. Those moments rarely go viral. Yet they're often where trust is built. Trust isn't created through emotional intensity. It's created through repeated emotional reliability. There is a subtle difference between being emotionally overwhelmed and being emotionally safe. They can feel surprisingly similar in the beginning. Both make your heart race. Only one lets your nervous system eventually relax. The other keeps demanding reassurance. Again and again. When someone becomes the center of your emotional world too quickly, every small change feels enormous. You begin monitoring tone, response times, tiny shifts in behavior, not because you're irrational, because your emotional security has become attached to uncertainty. That's exhausting. Love shouldn't require constant detective work. Curiosity is healthy. Hypervigilance is not. One invites connection. The other quietly drains it. Perhaps the hardest truth is this. Falling in love too fast doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean your feelings are fake. It may simply mean your hope outran your knowledge. Hope isn't something to be ashamed of. It's one of the most resilient parts of being human. But hope becomes healthier when it walks beside patience instead of replacing it. Because the deepest relationships usually aren't built in emotional sprints. They're built through repeated moments where two people continue choosing honesty over fantasy, consistency over intensity, and understanding over assumption. The strongest love doesn't always arrive like lightning. Sometimes it arrives so gradually that you barely notice it happening. Until one ordinary day, you realize you no longer have to imagine who the other person is. You finally know them, and somehow, reality became more beautiful than the fantasy ever was.